Okay, moving on to the next team in the Pac-12 that I will be going over today. That will be Tad Boyle and his Colorado Buffaloes, who will be entering their 11th season under the direction of Tad Boyle. And I do think last year, with the season getting shut down early, Colorado is a prime example of a team that I was very curious to see how they were going to do in the NCAA tournament. Because if you think about it, I was very high on the Colorado Buffaloes in the preseason last year. I really looked at all of the returning talent that they brought back, including McKinley Wright and Tyler Bay and Deshaun Schwartz. So I had some pretty high expectations for this Colorado team last year. And during the non-conference portion of their schedule, I think they lived up to the hype for the most part. They had a nice win over Clemson. They had a nice win over Arizona State in Shanghai. Their only two losses were to Kansas and Northern Iowa, who were both really good teams. And they had the big buzzer beater win over Dayton by Deshaun Schwartz. So I feel like Colorado last year, before the Pac-12 season started, was playing pretty good. But as time went on, I feel like they were just regressing, and ultimately they did not end their season very well. If you look at it, Colorado lost to UCLA at home. That's something that they rarely do, lose home. They then go to Cal and lose, and that's just an embarrassing loss. Cal, I understand they're improving, but if you're a team like Colorado who was trying to establish themselves as a legitimate Pac-12 contender, that is not a game you could lose. They then get crushed on the road at Stanford, and then they lose at Utah. And then this is where my eyebrows were really raised. And it's funny because not a lot of people remember this game due to the fact that it was literally one of the last games that happened before the pandemic hit and the college basketball season ended. But Colorado was the 6th seed in the Pac-12 tournament last year. That meant that they played their first game of the tournament against Washington State in the first round. And not only did they lose that game, but they lost that game 82-68. And going into that game, if you're Colorado, you lost 4 in a row. You're trying to go into March Madness playing some really good basketball. And unfortunately, that is the trajectory that I see Colorado going in. I think Colorado is going to be a bubble team, and I am lower on them than most. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that they ended last season losing 5 games in a row, including to teams that they should clearly beat, like Washington and Cal. If you follow Pac-12 basketball, you know that cannot happen. And the good news is for Colorado, I'm not trying to make it all negative, they do return a decent amount from last year's squad. The first guy that comes to mind is McKinley Wright, who I believe is one of the more underrated players in college basketball. He's a really good leader, and I really like what he's able to do on the floor. And then along with him, they bring back Deshaun Schwartz and Evan Batty. I think that's a really good top 3, and having that experience in a form of a trio is really good because you have a returning guard in McKinley Wright who could really score, he could really dish, and he's a good lead ball handler that's experienced if you are Colorado. They also bring back Deshaun Schwartz, who was the kid that hit the buzzer beater in the game I referenced earlier against Dayton. He was really good last year. He was really the guy, I think, when I watched Colorado, that developed into the guy that could go get a bucket at any time. And also Evan Batty, who's one of the more underrated players in the country. He's very skilled. He's like the 6'8", 6'9", overweight big man who could really get the job done. And I do think that is a really good top 3. It's pretty solid. That's a pretty accurate word to use to describe that top 3 because they're very reliable, they're very consistent. I just question the playmaking and if there are any ceiling to a team that has those 3 as their top 3. I think those 3 guys could provide you with some wins just based on their experience, but what I worry about with this Colorado team is just what they lost. And the first 2 guys that come to mind are Tyler Bay and Shane Gatling. I'll start off with Tyler Bay. Him and McKinley Wright were part of what made Colorado so good over the last couple of years. Tyler Bay was a guy who Tad Boyle could just plug in on defense, and he knew what he was going to be getting from him on the offensive side of the ball. He was the Pac-12 Defensive Player of the Year last year, and even though he wasn't soaring through the air for a jaw-dropping block, he was pouncing on lazy perimeter passes, which usually ended in a thunderous exclamation mark throwdown. And I feel like Colorado, a lot of their fans are expecting this kid, Jeriah Horn, to come in. And I think he's one of the better grad transfers on the market. I think that was a solid move for Colorado. I just think when I look at Colorado, they have playmakers. They just need some more shot makers. And I think losing Shane Gatling is a huge part as to why I'm kind of down on this Colorado team. Shane Gatling is another guy that I feel like because he played on the West Coast at Colorado, not a lot of people realize that. But at the same time, when you watch Colorado, Gatling was one of the more consistent players last year, especially on the offensive side of the ball. If you look at his numbers last year, Gatling was a guy who played really well for this Buffalo team. He averaged 6.5 points per game and shot 32% from three. I feel like with this Colorado team, they're going to need a little bit better shooting because they also lose Lucas Seward, who is one of their more consistent shooters. He shot about 39% from three last year. And they lose Bay, who also shot 42% from three. And to be honest, that's a number I never really expected to see him hit. So I feel like there are a lot of things that Colorado this year is going to have to replace from last year's squad. And in order for them to do that, I think their freshmen are going to have a lot to do with it. Tristan Da Silva, Dominique Clifford, Keyshawn Bartholomew. I feel like these are all guys that could have a big role for this Colorado team just because if you look at the bench, right now their projected sixth man is Dallas Walton, who is super experienced, but after watching the redshirt senior play last season, I don't necessarily know if Colorado could trust him as a guy to play consistent minutes just because last year he did not look anywhere close to the same player he was for the first couple of years of his Colorado Buffalo career. And then the other kid is Maddox Daniels, the 6'6 senior JUCO transfer. He averaged 3.2 points per game, 1.3 of rebounds per game last year, about an assist per game. And I feel like Maddox is going to have to be a kid that when you look at Colorado and you ask yourself, okay, Zach, you're down on Colorado. How do you see them being better than people expect? And for me, I feel like the answer to that question would be, okay, let's see a guy like Maddox Daniels improve a little bit and be better than people expect. And along with the freshman class as well, this kid Bartholomew, a lot of people throughout the Colorado program are pretty high on them, and not only him, but their freshmen in general. So I really like this Colorado team. I like Tad Boyle. I think he's a good coach. I just think when you compare their shot makers to the other teams in the Pac-12, I'm not necessarily sure if I could take these Colorado Buffaloes over them. I was really high on Colorado last season. I was on the bandwagon, even after they lost to Kansas, even after they lost to Northern Iowa. But the more and more I watch these guys play, their offense could go very cold at times, and I don't know. I'm just curious to see if Tad Boyle could ever hop that ceiling and get Colorado to be a top 20 team for about a 2 or 3 year stretch. And I know this is not the easiest job in the country, but at the same time, I know this Colorado team has a lot of talent. I know Tad Boyle is a good coach, and I would love to see him prove me wrong. But at the same time, right now, looking at this Colorado squad, especially comparing it to some of the other teams in the Pac-12, I'm not sure if I could put them as high as everyone is thinking about putting them. And once again, a lot of that has to do with the way they ended last season.